Welcome to our agenda setting meeting for August of 2016. Welcome to those of you that are visiting with us here in the chamber tonight, and also those that are watching remotely. Your participation and interest is appreciated. We're glad you care that much about the proceedings of your local government. Those of you that are here with us tonight, if you'd like an agenda, there to the right of the doors just as you exit. And for those watching on AC, excuse me, Robert, is the mic on? You look like you were not quite here, ma'am. Sorry. But for those of you watching from home, you can access an agenda through Athens-Clarke And for those visiting with us tonight, if you have a cell phone, would you please turn them off or to silent? We have two meetings tonight, a special call meeting and an executive session for an attorney-client conference to discuss pending legislation, and that will be immediately following the agenda-setting meeting. Ms. Bratton, would you call the roll for us, please?
Dickerson. Here. Sams.
Here.
Link. Here. Wright. Here. Bailey. Present. Neesmith. Bale. Here. Harrod.
Present.
Gertz.
Here.
Hamby.
Here.
Thank you. I do have a motion to go into executive session.
Move that we go into executive session at the close of our agenda setting session.
I'll second that.
Have a motion second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Now do I have a
Madam
motion?
Mayor, I move for adjournment of the executive session.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a motion second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We will now begin our August 16th agenda-setting meeting. No final action will be taken on items discussed tonight. They'll be moved to our September 6th business meeting for final consideration. There are two opportunities tonight for citizen input. The first is on our consent agenda, which are items 1 through 4, and then items 5 through 9 under new business. Rules of the Commission allow each citizen to speak 3 minutes on each item. There's a light on Ms. Spratlin's desk, and I've learned recently there's also a light there at the podium you can keep an eye on that lets you know when your time is running out. When it turns yellow, you have half a minute left. So please try to have your remarks finished by then so that I won't need to interrupt you. And I also ask visitors to please be respectful of speakers and refrain from demonstrations. Items on our consent agenda have been reviewed by the agenda team, which consists of the mayor pro tem, our county attorney, and senior management staff, and are recommended for approval on Tuesday, September 6th. The mayor or any commissioner may remove an item from the consent agenda. This is the time that anyone who would like to comment on our consent agenda, and again, that's items 1 through 4, would come to the podium. Please give us your name, your address, and let us know which item you're speaking to. Anyone wish to speak on items 1 through 4? Items 1 through 4. Seeing none, we'll come behind the rail. Do I have would any commissioner like to remove an item from the consent agenda?
I'd like to remove number 4, please.
Yes, ma'am. And we'll consider that first under new business. Anyone else? Do I hear a motion for?
We don't need to.
No motions tonight. We're in agenda setting. Okay, we will now move to public input on items 5 through 9. Anyone wishing to speak to one of those, please come forward.
Hi. This is in reference to agenda item number 9. Thank you for being here, you guys. My name is Heidi Elrod. I live at 230 Gatewood Circle, Athens, Georgia, 30607. I'm a program director for a small marketing company here in Athens. I've witnessed some unjust hate in Athens lately, and we're proposing justice and equality for all. We can't pass the proposed ordinance as it is and expect to change anything. There is nothing keeping bar employees and especially other businesses from continuing how they treat other citizens, our citizens and visitors of Athens. The ordinance only addresses 2 single issues at exclusively bars. We need the intent of this ordinance directed at all Athens businesses to target and suppress any type of discrimination. If we only suggest that bars keep documentation of dress codes and private parties, which could be easily falsified, they will find other ways to discriminate against anyone they please. This ordinance also does not address, define, or fund a process for discrimination complaints. If the attorney's office does not conclude that a complaint is valid, then it is solely up to the claimant to follow through with administrative proceedings. which makes it very difficult and discouraging for real victims of discrimination to find justice and equality in our county. These victims will need an advocate, which is why implementing the Athens Civil Rights Committee is so important. I've been attending a lot of vigils, meetings, and gatherings lately, and it's evident that Athens wants justice and equality that isn't being served. We need our county commissioners to partner with us and support our efforts to establish a committee that would assume the responsibilities of mediation for our victims and address other broader challenges in our community. I know I speak on behalf of a large portion of our community when I say that we need to eliminate prejudice and intolerance in Athens-Clarke County. I went to a local Athens non-alcohol serving business in Normaltown with a friend who is multiracial, and she was called the N-word by an employee of the business, and we were told to get out. And my friend was clearly humiliated. The proposed ordinance won't do anything about this. This is 2016, and we really shouldn't have to beg for justice and equality in our county. This is important. This won't go away until we do more to address it. Civil and human rights are still a huge concern in Athens. Please help our community by approving this committee.
Heidi, would you tell us your last name again? There was a lot of
Elrod,
noise.
E-L-R-O-D.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, Commission, staff, and everyone in the audience. Alvin Sheets, Post Office Box 5142, Athens, Georgia 30604. Well, friends, once again, we face another dilemma. The local system has created a climate where proprietors can feel comfortable with discriminatory practices for which some are gathered here tonight. The Athens-Clarke County government and community has some decisions to make. We must decide if we are going to sit back and turn a blind eye to discriminatory practices. This anti-discrimination ordinance is little more than window dressing. For this ordinance should not be for bars only, because we know there is certain segments of our population whose money is not appreciated. I want you to think about that a second. Atlanta has an ordinance in place, as well as Charlotte, North Carolina, that we could extrapolate from. Now, if we want Athens to be the crown jewel of Georgia, we have to start with a proper setting. Take this back, return this back to the committee, and study the other governments who have anti-discrimination policies. It only makes sense, friends. It's a shame that here in 2016, as the young lady said earlier, that this is still a major issue. Now, while our current attorney may be a fair and equitable administrator of justice, who's to say that the next attorney will be fair and equitable? He could be tyrannical. We never know. It's only proper that a Human Rights Commission be empowered to review such charges and complaints. With that, peace be with you. Salam.
Thank you, Mr. Sheets.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Commissioners. I'm Deborah Gowan. I live at 105 Edgewood Drive in Athens. I am a local attorney, self-employed, a disability law practice. And I'm coming before you tonight to ask you not to pass this ordinance without including an amendment to create a Human Rights Commission or a Civil Rights Committee. I know that the Athens for Everyone has drafted a proposal for I believe they called it a Civil Rights Committee. I've looked at that. I think that is a wonderful proposal. It certainly is something that you could look at and have discussions about and make changes to, but at its core, the creation of a committee or a commission for human rights or civil rights is an important and integral part of this process. I think where we're at in our community right now is that there is an extraordinary desire and an energy around having conversation, having community, and having transparency around issues having to do with discrimination. So we're at a crossroads where we have an opportunity to do so much in this community. And frankly, this ordinance, while it does some things, it doesn't do nearly enough. I am want to applaud you all for taking this on. I want to applaud you for the resolution that you passed and for the creation of this ordinance, but I see no reason to limit the ordinance or the process to the narrow issues that have been brought before you. Yes, there were complaints about bars. That's what spurred this process. But this is an opportunity to do so much more. And I think that one of the biggest problems with this ordinance is the lack of transparency and the lack of opportunity for community building. So by instituting a commission or a civil rights committee or a human rights commission or whatever we decide to call that, we create the opportunity to do so much more in this community, to have those dialogues, to have that transparency, to build community. Because in the end, what is going to change and evolve this community isn't just going to be litigation over this incident or that incident, but it's going to be building dialogue and community and transparency and conversations amongst all the diverse groups that exist in this community. And you are in a position to do that, to create that. You have models, as Mr. Sheets pointed out. Atlanta in particular has done an excellent job in drafting and passing legislation that addresses these issues. I'm not sure they've done an excellent job in enforcing the legislation that they passed. So let's show them up and let's do better here in Athens. We can do better. We are a smaller community, so we have a lot of power in our size to create and demonstrate to the rest of Georgia that we are that crown jewel. So I ask you not to pass this ordinance without an amendment that creates a human rights or a civil rights committee and addresses discrimination in all of the aspects of our community, not just the downtown bars. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gowen.
Good evening, Mayor and Commission. Broderick Flanagan, 1645 East Broad Street. I'm here to speak to item number 9 tonight as well. I would like to ask that, first of all, I'd like to thank the commissioners who worked on this policy and to form the current language and been receptive up to this point to certain things that need to be added to create an inclusive ordinance. I do feel that there are some things that need to be changed, especially specifically the language referring to just bars. There's a lot of discrimination that happens outside of those spaces, and I feel that this ordinance should include more than just bars here in Athens. Also, to ask that we form some type of civil rights commission or human rights commission so that they can keep track of incidences and help the citizens that these occurrences happen to. They can help them to investigate and take them to the next steps. Because I feel like with this type of data, being a data-driven town, I believe, with so many social services and nonprofit organizations, data is what really drives, I think, this local government, because we do so many studies on different things. So I believe forming this type of commission would be able to keep track of that type of data, and we can see the type of discrimination that's really happening here in some of these establishments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flanagan.
Good evening, Mayor and Commission. My name is Carter Adams. I live at 383 Nacoochee Avenue. I don't want to repeat the excellent points made by other residents this evening. I wish to add my perspective as an employee of the University of Georgia, though I emphasize that I speak as a private individual. In connection with my job, I've watched prospective students from outside of town discuss Athens, Georgia online. Our reputation as a community that discriminates has spread beyond the county line. Teenagers who are people of color have heard that they will not feel welcome in our city. Refusing to fight discrimination with an ordinance with real teeth will impact our ability to attract the best and brightest. I'm proud of this town, and I'm proud of the university we host. I ask you to justify this pride by creating a civil rights committee worthy of our progressive spirit. Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Gene, was his name Adams? Was his name Adams?
Hello. My name is Uma Nagendra. I live at 305 Willow Run, 30606. And I'm also speaking to item number 9. This is my first time speaking at one of these meetings, but I'm here because this issue is so important to me. I've lived in Athens for 5 years now, and one of the potential strengths and things that I love about this town is the diversity of its people. The people make the town. But the town, the government, needs to protect the people. The current iteration of the ordinance is insultingly limited. When you've got a leak in your roof, you've got a hole in your roof, you don't just put a pot under it to catch the water droplets. You fix the roof. And I think that's what we need to do here, is we need to have an ordinance that addresses more than just bars, because we all know that discrimination happens everywhere. It happens in housing, it happens at school, it happens at work, it happens when you're just visiting an establishment and wanting to buy their goods. It happens all over town, not just downtown. And a civil rights commission is a way that we can address that. A civil rights commission can advocate for people. We've seen it done in lots of other places already. We have models to work from. These measures are simple, and they're not expensive either, and they can be really effective. We can be a model. We can be a model for other places in Georgia. A civil rights commission, as someone already said, we are not looking to just slap a fine on people or spend lots of time litigating. This is an opportunity for us to spark conversations, get people talking to each other, educate ourselves and other people in our community about what it really means to be discriminated against and to fight discrimination. So again, I will urge you to not pass this ordinance as it stands, but to add a civil rights commission that has the authority and funding to actually act in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ginder.
Good evening, Mayor and Commission. My name is Jay Morris, and I'm a resident of 115 Plantation Drive, Athens, Georgia, 30605. I actually just recently graduated from the University of Georgia, and that 4-year time span, I can personally tell you that there have been people, organizations, and individuals, a lot of them not from here, who have sought to make me feel like I don't belong in the town that I grew up in. So this is just my account. I've been a resident of Athens, Georgia my entire life. I was born here, raised here, went to school here, and have done what I can, when I can, to give back to this vibrant and diverse community that I am so proud to be a part of. However, with that pride comes a pain stemming from the issue of systematic discrimination that has been allowed to develop within certain sectors of this community. With that pain comes a pride that our commission has taken steps to address and solve this issue. Unfortunately, the proposed ordinance is unsatisfactory, and if enacted, would be ineffective in addressing or solving the issue of discrimination. Systematic issues require systematic responses. Limiting the scope of the ordinance's power only to establishments in possession of liquor licenses does not take into account other businesses and organizations that may perpetrate discriminatory practices. The broad cultural, social, and economic factors that contribute to prejudice and discrimination will not be addressed by the ordinance as currently proposed. As the Athens-Clarke County Board of Commissioners does not reflect the demographic diversity of Athens-Clarke County, it is not convincing to marginalize minority groups that the ordinance, as currently proposed, will effectively address the discriminatory practices perpetrated by certain businesses and organizations. The ordinance, as currently proposed, does not adequately define or fund a procedure for the processing of discrimination claims by affected persons. The ordinance, as currently proposed, calls for only one attorney to validate complaints of discrimination, conduct preliminary investigations, and institute administrative action, which provides an opportunity for the misuse and abuse of these powers, as such not addressing discriminatory practices. These are not systematic responses to a systematic issue. For the reasons listed above, I support the establishment of an Athens Civil Rights Committee made up of members who reflect the demographic diversity of all stakeholders to validate complaints of discrimination, conduct hearings, and mediate and conciliate between affected parties. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Morris.
Good evening, friends. Jesse Houle, 260 North Chase Street. I too am here to speak to item 9. As you all know, the Civil Rights Act, which was passed way back in 1964, addressed the problem that we're talking about tonight, but it did not address it sufficiently. And to this day, we as a society have yet to address it sufficiently. But when the Civil Rights Act was laid out, it was laid out to address discrimination in a whole host of arenas, especially schools, workers, housing, and public accommodations. This ordinance is only addressing the latter and only a portion of the latter. It's misleading to refer to this as an anti-discrimination ordinance because it is not comprehensive enough. This is merely a Bar Admittance Ordinance. What about the worker who's fired for getting pregnant? What about the transgender woman denied service in a clothing store? What about the same-sex couple denied housing? This is why we need a civil rights committee, so that when we're asking these tough questions, we can come up with meaningful answers generated from the whole community. This is a great opportunity for the people of Athens to finally address old pain and deep problems. Please do not waste it. There's a good friend of mine who I think many of us miss dearly, Fenwick Broyard, who if he was here would say you can't legislate goodness, but you can pass good legislation. This is not enough. To make it adequate, we need to start by adding a civil rights committee. You have been working on this diligently with good intentions. Please, let's make the results of your work good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Houle.
Hi, my name is Vivian Prosper Hedges, and I live at 263 Barrow Street. I've lived in Athens for 7 years. 4 years ago, I made the transition from student to long-term resident, or townie, after I took a position as sales director at a graphic design and screen printing company. From this perspective, I can attest that the people I built relationships with in school felt more comfortable meeting, socializing, and collaborating downtown than the friends I've made since as a long-term resident. 5% of the undergraduate population is Black, and 27.7% of Athens-Clarke County is as well. And for this reason, I don't think my observations are a coincidence. Expanding this ordinance to include a Citizens Advisory Board honors a diverse community, demands that those who serve it equally, and centers those most marginalized within it. Your constituents deserve this standard.
Thank you, Ms. Hedges.
Good evening. My name is Christine Malazzi. I'm at 411 Oglethorpe Avenue. As a taxpayer, I'm speaking in opposition to item agenda number 9, the proposed anti-discrimination ordinance. The city of Athens has an opportunity to be a shining example to other cities, but the proposal does not go far enough to promote justice and equality. Thus, the opportunity to be an example will be wasted if this proposal passes. Before I moved to Athens, actually moved back to Athens in April, I was impressed by citizens' anti-discrimination efforts. I thought, this is a place I want to raise my children. Then someone reminded me that it was because the discrimination was so obvious that a march was even needed. This made me sad, because Athens is a heartful city, not a hateful city. Athens needs to continue to be attractive to citizens and businesses. Although I have mixed feelings about chain corporations in downtown, at least many are equal opportunity employers and even in some cases have advertising and social justice campaigns to support equality among diverse peoples. If Athens could point to our cultural identity of goodwill by instituting an effective process for dealing with reports of discrimination, it will speak volumes. A civil rights committee would be evidence of that goodwill. It would be more than a symbol. It would be integral in the part of ensuring that businesses, all businesses, are representative of Athens' cultural identity of justice and equality. Can I tell you what does not represent Athens' cultural identity of such? Is one attorney's office, no matter who that attorney is, whose office would be burdened with the overwhelming task of investigating a claim, then deciding the validity of that claim, then instituting administrative action before the claim is truly even able to see the light of day. The eventual need to hire more staff for the attorney's office would be costly compared to the formation of a civil rights committee. As a taxpayer, the committee is more appealing on both a financial and ethical level. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Ms. Malonte.
How you doing? Andy Linden, 280 Hodgson Drive. I've come to speak about item number 9 on the agenda. Now, I'm here to say that it just doesn't do enough. I mean, it only applies to bars. Aren't small businesses accountable for discrimination? And I have to say, one attorney in charge of it, it's kind of like when Teddy Roosevelt made tried to do trust busting back in the early 1900s. It was with intent that it wouldn't lead to corruption. Now, this agenda needs some tweaking, a little bit more tweaking, so that it applies to more people and less corruption. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Linden.
How you guys doing today? My name is Noah D. Johnson, 651 Lakeland Way, Athens, Georgia. I'm going to try something a little different. I want to appeal to your basic human senses and just thank you guys for hearing us today, because I know you guys are hearing what we're saying. I know you are familiar with the ordinance and the things that we're saying that can be improved in the ordinance. And I want to thank God and thank you for letting this message get in your hearts and get in your mind and really consider taking this ordinance back and adding this Civil Rights Commission, because we really need this. I love this city. This is my first time since I've been here in Athens really being involved in township and this political process, and I can't believe nowhere in my heart that you can see over 1,000 people march and protest from January to August about this issue and not move on it and not listen to them. So I can't see that happening. So in advance, I would just like to thank you guys for hearing the people and doing what needs to be done to make sure that this is a legit ordinance and we don't have to revisit this in the same way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Good evening, Mayor, Commission, and staff. My name is Brianna Bivens, and I live at 127 Riverdale Drive. Like many others, I'm here tonight to urge you, first of all, to expand the scope of the ordinance to apply to more than just downtown bar establishments, and additionally, to incorporate the creation of a civil rights committee into the proposed anti-discrimination ordinance. To leave the mediating authority in the hands of a single individual is to miss a critical opportunity to heighten the voices of Athens-Clarke County residents and to increase participation in local government. The effectiveness of any anti-discrimination ordinance rests in the existence of a diverse committee of residents to hear, investigate, and make recommendations regarding instances of discrimination. I fear that in the absence of a diverse, accessible civil rights committee, the process for victims of discrimination to have those instances addressed may be both burdensome and intimidating. To ensure justice and equality, as many have called for here tonight, tenets that we've historically claimed to support but are still fighting to achieve today, the powers of mediation in response to discrimination must lie with a diverse group of residents committed to civil and human rights. I urge you once more to establish a civil rights committee to ensure instances of discrimination no longer go unresolved. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Bivens.
Good evening. My name's Greg Wagstaff. I live at 229 Kalima Avenue in Athens. Speaking again to item 9, there are over 250 cities and counties across the country that have created and utilize currently human relations or civil rights commissions. From big cities like Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Dallas, Denver, Houston, New Orleans, Kansas, Seattle, St. Louis, New York, and Los Angeles, to smaller cities, commissions in smaller cities like Lawrence, Kansas, Shreveport, Louisiana, Fayetteville, North Carolina, and Starkville, Mississippi. From these commissions, from the commissions of Youngstown, Fort Wayne, Santa Clara County, Anchorage, Louisville, Evansville, Jacksonville, and East Lansing, borrowing from their programs and mission statements, we see that they are proactive programs of education and intervention. They foster mutual respect and understanding, and they work to help stop hate in their communities, to address activities which promote human dignity, equal opportunity, and harmony. Providing free and confidential services to the public, cases involving discrimination and harassment, seeking to bridge the many ethnic, racial, and religious groups through education and outreach, to award the mayor's celebration of diversity awards. They're committed to engaging the community in conversations that foster mutual understanding and respect, intervention to resolve disputes via mediation. Certain college towns across the country also have a civil rights commission. The University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri, the Columbia Commission on Human Rights investigates, mediates, and provides community education and outreach. University of Oregon and Eugene, Oregon, Eugene Human Rights Commission creates working groups, designates liaisons, crafts resolutions and statements, facilitates collaboration and partnership, presents an annual award to local change makers. Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, the City Council created the HRC to make recommendations to the Council that improve community life for all residents. Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, to foster tolerance, mutual respect through education and public awareness programs, to resolve conflicts through the use of mediation and conciliation. From Orange County, California to Orange County, North Carolina, human rights and civil rights commissions are working to build stronger
Excuse me, Mr.
communities.
Wagstaff.
I'm sorry.
Your time's up. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. That's it? All right,
Yes, sir.
thank you.
Good evening. Walter Swanson, 200 Springtree Road in Athens, Georgia. I have not been discriminated against, especially in bars, because the bars I go to are blues bars and they encourage minority people. But that's not the point. The point is we need to have a good resolution to the problem. And the problem being that you need an independent body that's going to judge these things, not just one county executive to do that. And in this commission, you need to make it look like not me, but a very diverse group. Don't do like the school board and that has over majority minority students, but only gets 22% or 20% minority teachers for the last 5 years, which is, you don't get confidence when what you look at doesn't look like you. So those that are discriminated against need to see something that is going to represent them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson.
Hi, everybody. I'm Justin Johnson. I live at 123 Easy Street. I understand this ordinance came out of response from the studies conducted by the SGA identifying these two ways that people are being discriminated against, and we're trying to stop those two ways that people are definitely being discriminated against. But we all know that there are many other ways that people are being discriminated against. So the question is, do we wait for the SGA to identify these other ways that people are being discriminated against, or can we set up an Athens Civil Rights Committee that can study these issues, be more focused on these issues, and help create actual solutions to these real problems that are still going to be facing the community after this ordinance is passed, should this ordinance be passed. I think we all know there's more that we can do, and I think we owe it to the people of our community to do as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Tim Denson, 290 Midway Road. Good evening, Mayor and Commission. First, just want to thank you for your patience. And secondly, I want to say that and remind everybody that we're here out of love. We're here because we love this community, we love the people of this community, and we want the best for this community. We genuinely think that this is what this community needs. And this isn't just a few people. There's a lot more who can't be here. And I want to thank you for the work that has been done, because good work has been done. Unfortunately, it doesn't go far enough. What we have created is a really good and effective Bar Admittance Ordinance. And I am completely in support of this Bar Admittance Ordinance. This is not a discrimination ordinance. And even outside of that, I do think we need a stronger discrimination ordinance, and I understand there are hurdles to get to that. But something there's not hurdles for is for us to establish an Athens Civil Rights Committee. Something that there are models for that have worked, something where there are models that we already have here established in our own county government, committee models of the Vision Committee, which I sit on, which could actually be run in a very similar way to get the same kind of results, but for a much more important matter. And there's proof that these things work. I had a fantastic hour-long conversation with Maureen Eek, the chairwoman of the Human Rights Committee of Isabella County, Michigan, home of Central Michigan University. I talked to her about this, how she's sat on this committee for 8 years and has been the chairwoman for 6 years. She told me, we are not an enforcing committee. We don't have legal power, but we do report to the county. Our committee is empowering. People realize we are here, that we will help, and that we will fight when it is necessary for them. She told me a great story that happened 3 months ago about a housing issue in which they had a person come to them that was being discriminated against in their apartment complex, and they did not know where to go. As you all know, there are places that they could go on the state level in Michigan and also on the federal level. There are things that can be done, but it's very difficult to know how to do this. This committee stepped up. They investigated it first. They had conversations with this person. After they actually accrued a lot of great information and evidence on this, they packaged it together. They told this person where they could go. This person went and followed through on this, and the state actually sent them back a letter, this committee a letter, thanking them for the work that they did and establishing and gathering this evidence, and said because of that, this actually might be successful and they'll have positive outcomes. She also told me that there are definitely hurdles. There were huge hurdles in them trying to get this established in the first place. She said people don't like to talk about these things, about discrimination. It makes government officials nervous, and it does. But we need to step outside of our comfort zone. We need to be able to establish policy outside of our comfort zone. This will empower. This will help us gauge what our community is, help us build community, help us create leaders who are diverse, which is something we're lacking. And in general, it'll help us tackle this thing, which is a societal problem. This is something that even a strong ordinance would not fix, but a committee and a discussion that is ongoing can. Thank you for your time.
My name is Mocha Jasmine Johnson. I live at 651 Lakeland Way Drive. First, I want to say that we're not trying to work against the government. We're trying to work with the government in some way, shape, or form to help bring justice and equality in our city. If everybody in this room was to commit a crime today, and only one person, everybody in this room right now was to commit a crime today, and only, let's say, the mayor was held accountable for it, because she is the mayor, how fair would that be? That wouldn't be fair, or that wouldn't be just. So basically, we're pleading. Discrimination exists more than in the bars. They exist all around this town. I've had my own fair share of discomfort walking into different stores downtown, but can I prove that it was discrimination? When I walk inside of a store that's supposed to give you customer service, and they don't give you customer service, they do not acknowledge you, they do not greet you, what is that? There's different instances that I have experienced and I've seen other people experience, but it's almost like it's silent discrimination. How do you prove that? Well, if we have if we have this committee in place, then people can file reports, evidence can be collected, then it can be presented. It can be presented to you, and that data and that information you will have to see that it's not just false claims. People are not just running around saying this and saying that. Even with the bars right now, it's not balanced to just penalize or being able to just penalize them. And I feel like there has to be another way. And I think the Civil Rights Committee, having something like that in place, or a Human Relations Committee that can address different issues and work with the government so that it's fair and balanced for businesses and citizens, I'm just pleading with you to just consider that. I know that you spent a lot of time on this, and it says a lot because it even came to the table in the first place, and the attorney got involved, and he took his time to draft it. So that does say a lot, and I believe that you guys do care. But I just ask that you just take more time to look deeper into this. Do your research. Look at other cities and see how it can work, because just penalizing the bars is not going to end it. There's people that send in emails and they talk about discrimination from apartment complexes to local stores, restaurants. Then what? What do the people do? They can't just go, what do the people do? So if we have something in place like this, I believe that it will help to create balance within our system. And I'm going to say this again. We're not trying to work against the government. We're not trying to work against y'all. We're trying to work with y'all for justice and equality for everybody. Unless you know what it's like to be an African-American person living in this society every day, walking into different places, feeling like you're not welcome in certain places, you might not have gotten a job because of the color of your skin or your hair or being treated differently, empathetically wise, how can you really say that what you have in place is going to work, especially if you didn't come from that background, not knowing what it feels like to be an African-American person or someone that's different or someone that's just a minority dealing with different issues. So I'm just going to ask you guys again to take this into serious consideration.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening. Claire Bolton, 255 Oglethorpe Terrace, Athens, Georgia. So I, too, would like to speak about the Bar Admittance Ordinance. When I moved here in 2010, I had a good friend visiting town. We went out to the bars at night, and we went to a couple different places. She's from New England, right? So at the end of the night, she asked me, I feel a little weird saying this, but why are the bars here so white? I thought that towns in the South were much more diverse. I thought there would be kind of, less white people here than back home. So I really remembered her comment, and I soon learned over time that there's this range of discriminatory practices, which you know about very well by now, in the downtown bars. And so it is important to focus on downtown bars. As a result, I support the Bar Admittance Ordinance. But I also believe and know very deeply that the problem itself, the problem of discrimination, systemic racism in our community goes a lot deeper. I've found over the years that minority and white communities in Athens more or less live in different and vastly unequal worlds. As a result, I strongly advocate also the formation of an Athens Civil Rights Committee as an infrastructure, not just an ordinance, that can address these larger, deeply rooted issues of discrimination in our committee, or in our community, not committee. So I strongly advocate and support that you take this additional step forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Anyone else wish to speak?
Tommy Valentine, 370 Cleveland Avenue, Athens, Georgia, 30601. I came here today as an observer. I don't have planned remarks that can in any way match the statements that many who before me have said. So I'll have to rely on being mainly extemporaneous here. But I was compelled to come up here and share something with you. I moved here when I was 5, and when I was at Cedar Shoals, I was on the cross-country team. And in my most humiliating moment, I ran the city meet at Athens Academy, and I mistook a chalked soccer line that was about 15 feet before the finish line for the finish line and collapsed and thought I had won. And the time it took me to get back up my feet, 4 or 5 other people ran around me. I'd worked really hard to get to that line, but it was the wrong line. And I know I see so many friends here, and when I turn around, I see friends and other people I went to school with here, and I know that there's been so much work done to get to this point. I have to agree with what Tim said in that, in many ways, this isn't an anti-discrimination ordinance so much as it is a bar admittance ordinance, and that's still important. In those 26 years I've lived here, I've worked at bars, I've been a concert promoter, and I've seen how many people receive discrimination on a nightly basis. And for those of you that might doubt that because there's lack of evidence, I would remind you that when committees like this are formed to deal with things like sexual assault or sexual harassment on campus, and when there's a perception that it's a safe space to come forward, that evidence emerges. And I think that if we have a situation where that perception has changed, then we can actually have the evidence that'll justify it. I also want to add that the enemy here isn't commissioner, or the fight isn't between commission and activists. The fight is between all of us and racism. And that's a generational fight. It's not something we're going to solve with one ordinance. It's not something we're going to solve with one thing. But it's something that as long as we are born looking different, we will have to address. I also wanted to just add this. Whether or not you believe that there is a racism problem that would deserve a committee like this, you have to understand there is a perception problem. And if there is a perception problem, I know from my experience in the private sector, I know from studying public administration and policy, I know that when there's a perception problem, you have to address it or else you lose. And in this case, we have for the entrepreneurs downtown and around the city, the risk is losing out on a tremendous amount of business from people of color and from other disadvantaged populations that may not feel safe. So in closing, since I see a yellow light, let me just say that I thank you for the work you've done. I understand that this is a difficult choice, but I'd ask you to decide where the finish line is and when you're ready to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Valentine. Seeing no one else wishing to speak, we'll come behind the rail, and we will start with our new business, and we'll start with item number 4, which Ms. Link asked to have removed.
Yeah, I asked to have this item removed. This is a recommendation for public art on the rail trail, using that small percentage of rail trail funding for an art element. But what's being proposed is not an art element on the trail. It's an art element in Dudley Park. I really think that this needs to be sent back to the commission and taken a broader look at. This is a real opportunity for a gateway piece, wayfinding piece. You know, we have a couple bridges as part of this rail trail. There are great opportunities for functional art. And so I'm hoping that we can send this back to the Cultural Affairs Commission and ask them to take a broader look at this. Because the long-term plan for this rail trail is that we will have a actual bridge going over Dudley Park to actually make it a proper rail trail, and that piece that is being proposed would no longer be a part of the rail trail when that happens.
Thank you.
I agree with Melissa, and I wonder, is there enough budget in this project to provide art and numerative interpretive pieces, informative and educational exhibits, and signage that we've always anticipated on the rail trail and Greenway project? So I think a big $60,000 piece of art in Dudley Park is not a rail trail art piece. I think it's simply an art piece, and we need to spend the money more wisely on those kinds of things I just mentioned and make them beautiful and make them artistic. So I would also like to send it back to the commission.
Mr. Kurtz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just looking at the agenda item over the last couple of days,
I too wondered if the Dudley Park location was the best nexus for viewing of a public art piece, or maybe the sole nexus for viewing of that piece. Certainly there's a very visible location where we now have just the trailhead on East Broad Street, and I wonder if that could also be included as an additional location, again, as a place where a lot of people are probably going to first encounter the trail. So I'd also like just some additional investigation as to what our options might be, rather than just focus on that sole area within Dudley Park.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to this item? Ms. Raleigh.
Yeah, I wanted to do some more homework on this as well, in learning about the groups that were involved in getting it to this point, learning that it's the users groups of the Rails to Trails and the user group of Greenway versus it being the Greenway Commission and the Rails to Trail Committee. So I probably have some more questions of staff to learn more. I read the agenda report, but I've still got some other questions to make sure the whole trail is being represented and that the money can still differentiate between the Rails to Trails and the Greenway, because we've got both there, and maybe having more markings throughout the trail. The wayfinding is, like Melissa had brought up, as well as arrows, and I think we have some with the Dragonfly on the Greenway, and so whatever could be on the Rails to Trails, and it could be going throughout the trail versus just all at one spot. So,
thank you. Anybody? Mr.
Just one
Eric.
slight correction. It's a firefly, not a dragonfly.
yes, that would make sense. Thank you.
Actually, the picture is a dragonfly, not a firefly.
Not that I'm an entomologist, that you understand.
Anyone else wish to speak to this? Okay, we're going to item number 5, which is the Greenway Network Connector, which these are SPLOST projects to 11 from 2011-2009. Would anyone like to speak to this item? Mr. Kurtz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm very excited at the prospect of moving forward with some significant segments of the Oconee Rivers Greenway, ultimately connecting Dudley Park, which we were just talking about, both with Sandy Creek Nature Center and eventually parts beyond, and then to the south connecting with College Station Road, and again, hopefully parts beyond. I did have a little bit of citizen question about the passageway through the Oconee Hills Cemetery, and certainly I know that's been a challenging area for staff to manage their safety concerns and concerns of the aesthetics around the cemetery. So I don't know if somebody from management could talk just a little bit about what the considerations are as we enter into that deeper dialogue with the Oconee Hills Cemetery.
Well, sure, and of course, our staff has met closely with the board, and you know, some of the concerns of the board include the view shed, and then having the trail come too close to certain sections of the cemetery, which you can imagine is a very reverent place, and you want to be respectful of ceremonies that go on there. But the alignment of that has been coordinated very closely with the Oconee Hills Cemetery Board, and they are the folks that are charged with looking out for it.
Great.
I don't know if that answered your question.
I think you did. And really, if people haven't been to the cemetery, the area where, you know, as you can look on the map, it intersects, really is probably the area where it's least close or furthest from actual grave sites themselves, right along the river.
Well, I would offer this too. One of the hallmarks of a great trail system is having destinations along the way. And people don't often think of a cemetery as a destination, but it's got a fascinating history behind it. And I think the Oconee Hills Cemetery Board sees the value of letting it be even more accessible, obviously within reason.
And to give anybody comfort, I sit on the Board of Trustees of Oconee Hills Cemetery, and I can tell you there's been extensive interaction with the Cemetery Board from our sales tax folks. So, Ms. Link.
I just have a couple questions about the unfinished portions of the trail. The parts that are unfinished, well, my iPad decided not to show me the map, those on the map. But the parts that are unfinished are the ones that are actually kind of the gateways to the trail. Is there any kind of estimated time where we might start some work on those, and just for the public's knowledge, when we can see this whole thing kind of come together?
Yes, and we did forward out after the last meeting the estimated completion dates, And, the good news is we're building a lot of trails in a short amount of time. The bad news is it's hard to coordinate the logistics of those all coming together at the same time. But we feel confident that a meaningful path will be completed within 6 months. The various segments will complete within 6 months of each other to allow folks to get from, the current trailhead on Oconee Street all the way over to College Station Road. The connection to East Campus is lagging a little bit more. The DOT has those funds out in 19, but what they do is they reapportion those when folks are ready, and we are ready now. So we're hopeful that that can come closer. But not having the East Campus connection right now won't hurt the traversing that segment I just mentioned. It's only the connection to the students at the, which is important, but it won't be a hole in the route.
Thank you.
Ms. Bell.
Manager Williams, I'd like to go back and ask about the cemetery. Is the public free to go to the head of the committee that oversees the cemetery area to ask questions and see some kind of presentation that would give them some comfort? I've had probably more constituents asking about this one issue than I've had on anything else since I've been in office. It's part because I'm in the neighborhood area that has a whole lot of families. Is that possible?
Well, I'm sure that the Coney Hills Cemetery Board would be welcome to have conversation with. I can't speak for them. If some of your folks want to hear from our staff, we can certainly make them available to answer any questions or put together some points to address those issues.
Well, I know one person on the board that I can ask that I think that's chair right now, but I wanted to be sure that you had not, and also can pass that on from our session. Thank you.
And Mr. Williams, I think it probably would be helpful if staff would put something easily understood together related to the cemetery, because I've had some calls too, and it's hard to deal with all these one at a time. So if we could have some information to distribute, that'd be good. And I don't see any reason that it wouldn't be acceptable to come to one of the board meetings.
And Mayor, if you would, if y'all would share your concerns offline with me, then we'll try to collect information to address those.
Yeah. Thank you.
Excuse me, Jerry, I'll get back to you. Ms. Dickerson.
Yeah, just an observation that we go from sub-project 2, 3, and 4 and among the segments from like 12 feet wide to 6 feet wide to 14 feet wide. And I understand some of that has to do with the topography, but I guess my question is, would there be any opportunity for cost savings in making the paths longer? I know that's been an issue before. Is there any reason we have to go 14 feet or we have to go 6? In some of these trails, does it make sense to go wider? Why would we want to go wider? Could we make them more narrow and get more length out of it?
Ms. Williams, would you respond to that?
And appreciate that question, because I asked the same question. And it turns out, I think in the mid-2000s, that this was the standard, a 14-foot wide concrete trail for the main spine that ran along the river. And the reason being was that because it is the main spine, if you will, that there's going to be more traffic on that. And they wanted to allow 2 7-foot travel lanes to accommodate 3 foot for a pedestrian going in a certain direction and a bicycle 4 feet going in the same direction, so that there can be some passing room. That was the logic that was shared with me about why that was. You'll notice that, for instance, sub-project number 6 is a 12-foot wide trail. It's not a main spine, but it is a connector. As we move towards the latter parts of sub-project 4, the connectivity there, it would be very challenging, and we'd have to have a series of expensive retaining walls to be able to accommodate a path like that. And having been in other cities, there are aggregate, crushed rock type paths that are just as fine to convey folks and bicycles safely. And obviously we're saving with that. I will share with you that I believe in the Greenway Network Plan that's coming back before you shortly, that they have come up with a variety of widths and a variety of types of surfaces for you to consider, so we can use that standard going further to adjust as needed. I will say, too, that there are certain sections along the river where state regulations would rather us use a pervious pavement, and we'll use that where we can. But otherwise, it's concrete has been the standard up till now.
Mr. Neesmith.
Thank you. That was an excellent answer. Thank you. I had an interaction this week with Mark Constantino. I guess he's the president of the Board of Trustees for Oconee Hill. And I think, because I'm getting questions too, and I was certainly not prepared to tell the constituent what the opinion of Oconee Hill's Cemetery Board of Trustees was. So I think we need to be careful, and we might want to direct our constituents to the Board of Trustees so that they can hear, so that board can hear their concerns and give them the answers that they choose to give. So I think we need to be careful about that.
Thank you. Mr. Sims.
And just to say, we had a feature on the news yesterday about this particular segment of the Greenway. So I think that's kind of spurred a lot of this chatter that's going on right now, because we couldn't clearly define exactly how everything was going to fall into place, because basically we haven't gotten to that point yet. But again, when you see it on television and you see a representative of Athens-Clarke County saying we're going through the cemetery, it does tend to have people getting a little antsy. So I think that we do need to work at trying to make sure that we get some clarity so that everybody is working in harmony with this.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Anybody else wish to speak to this one? Okay, we'll move on to item number 6, which is our Rails to Trails Network program. And these are also SPLOST projects from 2011 and 2005. Would anyone like to address those?
I just had a quick question, just bringing up the bridge again. Just for the sake of the public's knowledge, what is the way forward for getting that Trail Creek Bridge completed and actually completing the rail trail rather than simply the diversion into Dudley Park?
Well, this agenda item would connect through Dudley Park below the bridge, as you know. So in order to change this, the commission would need to vote this down or bring a commission-defined option to redirect the funds towards the trestle.
So is there any foreseeable plan for the Trail Creek Bridge, or the Murmur Trestle as it's known?
I know that it's been talked about for years, and I have not heard where it's been taken off the table. In this most recent conversation, what I sense was the consensus of the commission, don't know that until the voting meeting, is that to try to make that connection from East Broad Street over to Old Winterville Road was where we wanted to put, where the funds needed to be put for this for connectivity purposes.
Thank you.
Ms. Wright.
I would think that when this came up at the previous phase of it, that we talked about the expense of that bridge and the trestle project, and we talked about T-SPLOST being a perfect area for that. I think we've talked about several bridges in the last 2 months, and maybe we can make it to where bridges are the top priority on that T-SPLOST. 1 cent, 1 penny a month is bringing in averaging 1.7 million. So if we start thinking about that and that coming in each month and start adding up how much these bridges cost, that maybe we can get that prioritized for T-SPLOST and get a running list of our bridges and their prices and being able to explain those and where they can fit in. But it fits in, it doesn't interfere. What this is happening here does not interfere with that coming back in.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Neesmith.
I should know this, but I want to ask Mr. Williams a question. The dotted yellow line, which obviously is the switchback because the bridge isn't there, is that included in this project? Is the completion of that dotted yellow line?
There is already some existing sidewalk, but there is we have to come off. You'll see the red that drops away from the linear line there. Yeah. There's that connection there to make it make sense. I see. So there will be some tie-ins to the existing trail there.
Okay. Well, do you think it'll be of the quality that we need for that trail to be effective?
I think so. You've got some sharper angles there to try to get through Dudley Park, which, if you're on a bicycle, are not ideal. But again, I think given what the lay of the land there, that and the use of the sidewalk along Peter Street there to connect to the bridge, we're having to kind of make it work.
Yeah, I'm with Allison, and I think I'm with Melissa too, in that we really need to get this bridge done. It's okay, I think, now to delay it and not delay the rest of it, but we need to make that a priority. Thank you.
You want, Mr. Sims?
Just one quick thing about bridges, that I hope that we will, make sure that we get the estimations right. Right now down on Broad Street, we have the bridge that's next to the bridge. And the bridge was supposed to be across, actually was supposed to be going across, it's been part of the headway that goes across the Oconee River, but because of the length of the bridge, we had to put it where it is. So hopefully, in our estimating of bridges and the cost for these bridges, because the cost, that is steel, and steel is an expensive product, that we will, do it right so that it will really look like it should, because that, like I said, that bridge should have been over the Oconee River, headed straight to Chicopee, as opposed to where it is located. But the length of it was, and the cost to add on to it was prohibitive. So as a result, we got what we got. But let's get it right this time.
Okay. Anyone else want to talk about number 6? Okay. We'll move on to item number 7, which is our Legislative Review Committee's review of our Animal Control Ordinance. I believe that's Mr.
That guy.
That guy sitting over there, yeah. Mr. Gertz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is something of an interim report, and I guess I'll explain that before I dive a little bit into the meat of this. Anytime we have animal issues come up, they can be complex and have a diversity of opinion around them. And certainly this one is somewhat unique in that we're diving into some kind of new code area that we've not been in before. So we wanted to bring this, frankly, for comment from the full commission. And so we plan on taking comment and moving back to the committee level for some additional work, or at least confirmation of this, if everybody's satisfied with that. So just want to let you know a little bit of process. In terms of the substance here, what this draft does is a couple things. The first, it defines an electronic fence and dictates that an electronic fence is fine under some circumstances. It's fine if it's working, and it's also fine if there's signage at regular intervals so that anybody approaching a property would understand that there is an electronic fence there. Some of the concern from the public being that if you're a delivery person or somebody else approaching a property and you don't know that there's an electronic fence there, then you then have no reason to think there might be an animal there. If there's signage saying here is an electronic fence, you then think, oh, well, there may be an animal somewhere beyond the electronic fence. So it provides that. It also notes that an electronic fence would not be allowed for what you see toward the bottom of page 1. No animal that has been classified or is currently being reviewed for classification as a dangerous, potentially dangerous, or vicious dog pursuant to state or local law may be confined by means of an electronic confinement system. There are a couple of different layers of dangerous animals. One defined by state code when an animal has attacked a human being, and one defined by local code when an animal has attacked another animal. So if either of those marks of danger are true, that animal would not be able to legally be confined by an electronic confinement system. So I think that captures the sort of bulk of this, but again, the LRC is interested in input from the full commission and then is going to take this back.
Okay. They need input, so guys, what do y'all have to say, Mr. Neesmith?
I have some input. I think there's a little confusion in the electronic confinement system. It's not the definition, but the ordinance itself. It defines electronic confinement systems as it can be a fence or it can be an underground thing, where they have to wear the collars. But then it says that a domestic animal confined by means of electronic confinement must wear at all times an appropriate and properly functioning receiving device while within the confines of the system. The confusion there is if it's a fence, then there is no receiving device. But he's in a fence. If it's a fence,
if it's an electric fence, the collar's not.
There's no device. If it's underground, then yes, it is. But so I think there's some confusion there because that would not be the case. You would not have to wear a receiving device if you're in an electronic fence above the ground.
Like a farm electronic fence, like a cow fence.
Well,
so this is about
electrified
the
fence.
wire.
Yeah, electrified fence.
So is this only addressing the underground wire?
This is addressing the underground.
Okay, I think it needs to be made clear because that's not what the definition says.
Mr. Harrod, Mr. Harrod, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate what the committee has done. I have 2 dogs. We've had more in the past, but they've gone to pastures greener. I put one of these electronic fences around a pond in our backyard to keep the dogs out of the fence, and I might just as well have not bothered doing that because these dogs went through that like it wasn't even there. My concern, frankly, is that electronic fences, despite some people having some success with them, are not an effective means of restraining a dog. They also do not keep other dogs off the property. And anybody that's been around dogs knows that when one dog comes onto the piece of property that is the territory of another, they can get into all sorts of malarkey, as our vice president likes to say, and chase each other around. And it's very easy for a dog, even that's wearing a collar, to experience a half a second of a short electric shock to their neck, and then they're off. So to my way of thinking, although I appreciate what the committee has done, I simply don't believe that electronic confinement systems are effective means of controlling dogs and protecting the public health. And this is really, at the end of the day, what we're talking about. The way that this grade-in part of the paragraph under electronic confinement systems, the very last line where it says, no animal which is being classified or is currently being reviewed for classification as a dangerous, potentially dangerous or vicious dog pursuant to state or local law may be confined by means of an electronic confinement system. That tells me that each dog gets one free bite of a child, an old person, another dog, anybody else off the property. And so, although I appreciate what the committee's done, I simply don't believe that an electronic confinement fence system, whatever you want to call it, is an effective measure for controlling an animal on a piece of property. And at the end of the day, we have to look after the public health and safety, and I don't believe this does that.
Thank you, Mr. Harrod. Anyone else wish to speak to this item? Ms. Link.
I just wanted to mention that the AKC has a program called the Canine Good Citizen Program, where they have a test, a series of tests that you put dogs through to determine if they're dangerous or sociable. And I think maybe we might want to consider implementing that kind of program to allow dogs that might pass something like that to be subject to electric fences, or to enable dogs that might pass something like that in places that dogs might be prohibited, like some of our parks. I know other communities do it. I know Chattanooga had that program to allow dogs on their pedestrian bridge. So that might be a compromise solution for something like this, and also for other places where, you know, dogs may not be allowed, but simply because one bad apple can spoil the whole bunch if you get a vicious dog in an area. So I'm just throwing that out there. The committee might want to talk about something like that.
Anyone else? Mr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to address Commissioner Harrod's comments. I don't really have a response to the problem that another animal can enter the area, but the fences do take some training to keep animals in. Now, you can put up a 6-foot chain link fence, and some animals are still going to get out of it. But this electronic fencing system takes training of the animals, and some animals don't take to it, and it just does not work as well. That's the sort of thing you've got to figure out if your animal is going to stay in there or not. And if it doesn't, then it's not a good system for you. But one of the reasons that we're considering this is there are a lot of animals that run loose. Many of them would stay in an area that's using one of these electronic fences. The cost of an electronic fence is a few $100s, whereas the cost of fencing in a yard is thousands of dollars. So part of the logic in this is that that there are some people who cannot afford to do conventional type fences that could do this, and it, with the proper training, could very possibly be what they need to keep their dogs on their property and out of other people's property and creating any problems. So it's not foolproof. Those systems do take training, but they can be very effective too, and they're also very cost effective. And that can be very helpful for some pet owners who can't spend thousands and thousands of dollars on a fence. So that's my point. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Just a comment we made, we had a good discussion in the committee meeting, and one of the things that came up that some of the residents in my area have to deal with are covenants in their neighborhoods that don't allow them to have fencing, depending on where they're located. They can't have fencing in their front yard, and they don't have room in their backyard based on where their property line is and floodplains and such. So I think that's one of the things I guess we need to think about, not just cost, but also there may not be options for people to have, structure fences in their yards as a result. So I think we were trying to find a happy medium to this. There's no easy answer to this, but that was one of the discussions we had, was trying to deal with that issue as well.
Anybody else wish to speak to it? Well, if nobody else wish to speak, I'm going to say something because I agree with Commissioner Herod that the number one reason that we require animals to be confined is for public safety. And it seems like every time you hear of a child being attacked by a dog and hurt really bad, somebody always says, oh, that dog, we didn't know they were vicious, so they've never been a problem before. So it's that first time, and that first time can kill a child. I had an elderly friend that was attacked by two dogs in her neighborhood where she'd gone to carry flowers around for a community meeting and went into the yard, was attacked by the dogs, and it's just by the grace of God that she was not, that she didn't die, because she was very, very badly mauled by the dogs. And for some reason, she had the instinct to start rolling. And when she rolled out of the area of beyond the fence, the dog stopped. But I can tell you from my experience, my son has a farm, and he has the electronic collar on the dog. And when the dogs get excited, they see somebody that they coming up when they see me coming and they hadn't seen me in a long time, they ignore that little ping they get in their neck when they want to see you, and they go bounding down that driveway and they go to meet you. So I think it's a very risky thing to have animals confined by an electric fence. You have situations, you have signage, you're not going to have signage in every language. You're going to have people that don't know what the sign means. You're going to have children that can't read. And you're going to have other animals intruding into the yard. If a cat went through my yard when we had a German Shepherd, there was no electric fence that would have kept that dog from chasing that cat. So I can tell you that it's not an effective enough deterrent to protect the public. So for what it's worth, I wanted to share that with all of you. Any further discussion of this before we move forward?
Thanks for the comments. Take it back to the hopper.
Yeah. Great. Okay, we'll move on to our next item, which, get back to my agenda so I can tell where I am.
Can I tell a funny story about the electric fence real quick while you're
Oh,
looking for that?
we can't have a night without a funny story from you,
And I can,
Mr.
I
Andy.
can
Go
understand.
ahead.
I can understand why Andy's dogs would ignore the electric fence. They're about as mean as he is, so, especially Clyde. But I was.
Well, mine ignored it out of love. Yeah.
I have some friends that live a street over from me, and when they go out of town, I watch their little dog Trudy. It's a little Jack Russell. And they went out of town a few months ago, and when they got back, I took Trudy back, of course. But the next night, or actually I was downtown at the food truck festival, I believe, and somebody was asking me if I was watching Trudy, and I said no, they're back at home, so everything is good. But when I get home from the food truck festival, Trudy is standing on my porch, and I'm like, what in the world's going on? So I take her back. And then a couple days later, Trudy comes back again. This is late at night. She's barking at my door to let her in and give her a treat or whatever I was feeding her. So this happened a few more times. And finally, they got Trudy in that electric fence. and Trudy hadn't bothered me since. So that's a selling point to take to your committee about that. Yeah.
Trudy permitted.
The Trudy bill. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Trudy knew where to get the treats, I guess.
Thank you for giving me time to get reoriented with your nice story.
I thought it was a good story.
It is a nice story. I've heard it before, and I still smile. We're now to item number 8, which is the towing of vehicles from public property. And do you have anything for us, Mr. Berryman? Or are we going to?
We'll have something for you at the voting meeting.
Okay, so we don't have anything to discuss tonight. And then item number 9 is the one everybody's most interested in, and it's our Government Operations Committee Anti-discrimination Ordinance. Mr. Harrod, you headed that committee. Would you like to open this for us?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So just to give a little bit of background, I think everybody's probably fairly familiar with this, but we did have the Student Government Association come to us earlier in the year with a long litany of issues to do with, or complaints, allegations of activities that have been taking place downtown. And so at our January meeting, the Mayor and Commission did adopt a resolution which specifically directed the attorney in the manager's office to come up with an ordinance to look specifically at the question of the issuing of alcohol licenses, since that is something that we can control, and to look at how we might address questions of discrimination with regards to entrance and other activities in the downtown bars. And so the attorney did come back after several months of analysis and research and looking at this question, and did present an ordinance to the Government Operations Committee. So what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, Madam Mayor, is perhaps to ask our attorney, since he was the one that drafted this, to talk a little bit about the ordinance itself, what it does, what we are legally able to do, the legal landscape within which we are operating and are able to operate. So, Mr. Attorney,
I think that could be
okay.
beneficial to all of us, if you don't mind, Mr. Berryman.
Certainly. Thank you. In preparing this ordinance, I started with the complaints that were forwarded to the Mayor and Commission by the SGA. And in looking at those, the complaints of discrimination really fell into two main categories. One was the use of dress codes as a pretext for discrimination. The other one was the use of alleged private parties occurring and persons being denied admittance because allegedly a private party was occurring, and then supposedly other people saw other members of the public being admitted. So those two specific alleged acts of discrimination I felt like could be addressed specifically in the ordinance language. And the sections that I'm going to talk about apply to Class D, E, and F licensees that are not restaurants. D, E, and F licenses are alcohol by the drink licenses. If, under our ordinance, a restaurant or an establishment qualifies as a restaurant, meaning it has more than 50% of its sales from food and other things other than alcoholic beverages, then it can serve on Sundays. So the complaints, as I reviewed them, came from establishments or were alleged to be done by establishments that were not restaurants. So the two items that are specifically addressed here, the dress codes, private parties, apply to D, E, and F licensees that are not restaurants. The first specific item addresses private events, and private events are possible, but if an establishment, a D, E, or F, not a licensed restaurant, has to have an agreement, a written agreement with the sponsor of the party, there needs to be a contact information. That agreement needs to be kept on the premises for 24 months so that someone from the attorney's office or the police department can review that. And it has to be available for inspection. The other thing is there has to be a sign that's located in a visible area near the entrance to any entrance, and it has to be legible, that says that a private event is occurring, the specific area within the licensed premises where the private event is being held, the duration of the event, and a following statement that says request for information regarding unlawful discrimination by alcoholic beverages licensees, together with any allegations of unlawful discrimination by such licensees or their agents, should be directed to the Athens-Clarke County Attorney's Office. Similarly, for dress codes, there's a requirement that the dress codes be written out. They have to be uniform during the day that the dress code is imposed. In other words, it can't change during the day. It has to be placed on a sign that's visible, just like the sign regarding the private event. It also has to have the statement about where complaints can be addressed. And any patron who is wanting to be admitted or who's denied admittance has the ability to see the sign. Dress codes are not prohibited, but this levels the playing field and gives transparency to any dress code process. Now, in addition to those two specific criteria in paragraph G, there's a more general paragraph that again applies to D, E, and F licensees, not restaurants, that discriminate on the admission to the premises. And the grounds for discrimination are broader than the federal grounds. They're the same grounds actually that are in the Athens-Clarke County Ordinance regarding employment by Athens-Clarke County, and it includes race, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, national origin, citizenship, age, disability, or pregnancy. There is an exemption for true private clubs, clubs that are organized as 501c3 charities, because they can govern their admission on things like age. So there is an exemption for that. Any of these violations are made violations of the alcohol ordinance, which allows for an administrative hearing for the licensee, and that could result in a fine, a suspension, or revocation of the license or probation. I think it's important to look at the process here. Local governments, by state law, are given very limited authority to issue licenses for businesses. There's no such thing as a generic business license. There's an occupation tax certificate, which sometimes people call a business license, but that is simply a taxing device that's allowed by state law. But other than taxis, I think fortune tellers, maybe a couple of other things, door-to-door sales, licenses just can't be issued by local governments in Georgia. The state regulates licenses for plumbers, psychologists, doctors, lawyers, things like that, but not at the local level. But in areas, in professions and businesses where a local government does have authority, it has a more effective way of handling discrimination complaints using the administrative process. The administrative process is not a criminal process. The rules of evidence are much more relaxed, and a licensee or the manager of the licensee can be called to testify and doesn't have Fifth Amendment rights. So that's why this particular ordinance is much more targeted, it's much more specific, because it can be proven, and also it's not directly related to discriminatory conduct. It's more related to actions that can be used pretextually for discriminatory conduct. So that's why this is more effective in looking at discrimination than, say, discrimination or alleged discrimination by just a business that's not regulated by the local government. So there's a complaint process set up. My office will review any complaints, and if my office finds a reasonable basis that discrimination did occur or that violations occurred based upon a citizen complaint, then my office, we have a person in my office who brings these cases, will go to the administrative hearing officer and essentially represent the government in this case. If my office does not find a reasonable basis for this, but the person who's made the claim of discrimination wants to continue, that person can seek to get an administrative hearing before the hearing officer and present his or her own case. It's important these events happen. Nobody from the government is there when these things happen, so it's going to be important that the person who's bringing the complaint have good evidence. Document what you see. Try to find witnesses to do it because, again, the evidence that's generated at that time is pretty difficult for an investigator from my office to go back and recreate those facts. So that's basically the background for this, Commissioner.
And just for clarification, because I think a lot of people might think, well, this is just about downtown, but it's any establishment that has a Class D, E, or F alcohol license. So that could be anywhere in the county, correct?
That's not a restaurant.
Yes.
Yes, that's correct. And there are venues like that in different places.
Ms. Link.
Can I ask why restaurants were left out? I mean, if restaurants have alcohol licenses, then they could just as easily be subject to this ordinance. Is there any reason why we decided that we don't need to hold them accountable for possible instances of discrimination? Because there are several restaurants that function as bars downtown, and I know at least one of them where someone has reported an instance of discrimination.
Virtually all of the complaints that I reviewed were for the D, E, and F establishments that were not restaurants. That's certainly a legislative decision that the Mayor and Commission could make to change that category.
And if we chose to do so, it would be administered the same way, right?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a really hard time supporting this as is, because I feel like in and of itself, the ordinance is discriminatory against one particular type of business. And I also feel that it's incomplete and ineffective and essentially unfair. And I'm sorry that this was brought before the Government Operations Committee during July when I happened to be on vacation. I did submit comments about this to the rest of the committee via email. And I just can't support it as is. I don't think it's complete, and I don't feel like it's effective. And we had quite a few people stand up and go through a litany of reasons. And I also feel like this is an issue that it's much broader than these specific instances of discrimination, and it's a golden opportunity to have an open and honest discussion about the culture in this community. And it's, by creating some kind of citizen review board to handle, to hear cases of discrimination, we're creating an opportunity for leadership. We constantly bemoan the fact that the leadership in this community does not reflect the diversity of this community, yet here we have a golden opportunity to create a citizen body that can nurture new leaders, and we don't seem to be eager to take it. So I can't support this without it being able to apply broadly to any and all businesses and housing and everything else, and also having a proper citizen review board. And there are dozens upon dozens of communities throughout the country that have those citizen review boards. Atlanta is one. I just read an article last week of they were celebrating appointing their first transgendered member to their Human Rights Commission. So, and it's not just a black or white issue. There's discrimination based on sexual orientation, pregnancy, disability, a litany of characteristics that people can be discriminated for. And I really feel like if we're going to go down this road, it needs to be a very transparent and inclusive process. And the folks who hear these claims need to adequately reflect the diversity of the community, not just the diversity of the citizenry, but also the businesses. I don't think that we can hold one office within the local government accountable for processing this.
Thank you, Ms. Wright.
Yeah, I'm not sure who can answer this, if it's a committee answer or the attorney. I'm interested in what the confidentiality of this process is for the citizen as well as for the establishment. Did we get that? Did you guys get that far with how there would be how that would be covered?
This process would be covered by both the Open Meetings Act and the Open Records Act, and the only areas of confidentiality would be cell phone numbers, if there were any allegations of personal privacy. But when you're in the realm of public accommodations, it's hard to say you have a claim of personal privacy. So not many aspects of a complaint would be shielded from an Open Records Act request.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Gertz. Next, then I'll get to Mr. Neeson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate it. I think given the specifics of many of those complaints that were brought to us, this targets that particular area of discrimination. Given what we heard from the students, but I think what we're hearing from the public is that, rather than just looking at one piece of discriminatory ammunition that we want to address, we need to take down the factory of discrimination. And so I've been able to look at least a few examples that the public have provided. There's been some dialogue over the months, and people have emailed links. And it seems like what other cities do kind of very broadly. Some of the organizations that cities convene are simply a forum for dialogue and community outreach and education, and generally encourage non-discrimination and encourage inclusion. Some of them really are almost a referral service for dealing with federal code and the Office of Civil Rights and help locals package their claims. Certainly if you're going to approach the Office of Civil Rights with a claim, much as approaching the attorney's office, it's that federal employee who's going to determine whether that case moves forward or not. And I think that can be a challenging issue to manage for certainly an unrepresented individual who doesn't have legal aid or legal help. Some of those other bodies out there address not just federal claims, but also the prospect of local claims. Orange County, Florida, for example, has local code that in many ways parallels federal code, but expands to some of the classes that Bill mentioned that we also cover in our internal hiring process. I don't think in the 3 weeks between tonight and our voting meeting, we would come up with exactly the model that meets Athens-Clarke County's needs, but I do have kind of strong sense that some forum for at least conversation, dialogue, or community outreach, something that would benefit us. We've heard these specific complaints in the last year or a couple of years. Certainly I have, but I don't think they're the only kinds of complaints that are out there. They're not the only kinds of complaints I've heard locally. There are housing complaints. There are complaints about other kinds of public accommodations. There are employment complaints. And again, even if we're to direct people's energy toward the federal remedies that do exist, I would love to see a manner in which we can assist people and hold their hands on that very difficult journey. So I don't know if what ultimately we could end up with would be a staff-intensive thing or a more citizen-intensive thing or some combination. But I would like us to do some more work on this, whether that was in the form of just a citizen study committee, some additional commission subcommittee work, or some other means. So I'd like us to consider that approach when we come to our voting meeting at the beginning of September.
Thank you, Mr. Kurtz. Mr. Neesmith, did you want to speak?
Yes, thank you, Kelly. I agree. And I agree this ordinance is probably effective as an anti-discrimination tool for bar and perhaps restaurant bar admittance. And I agree with the speakers that Athens should strive to be a model for many things, including honoring inalienable rights. I also agree that a civil rights committee or a similar thing, such as the one in Atlanta, may be a good tool for making strides with these issues in Clarke County. And I hope this body will consider the implementation of policies and practices of the Civil Rights Committee or some similar vehicle to work on these rights. I also believe that the legislation before us is needed, and it's needed now. It uses this government's ability to use our power to issue liquor licenses, enforce our laws regarding those licenses. So I'm going to support its passage 100%. But I encourage the mayor and this body to begin to take the next much more complex steps in developing some new policies and broader anti-discrimination processes along these lines. Using Mr. Valentine's parable, the race ends at the finish line, but it begins with the first stride.
Anyone else wish to speak? Ms. Dickerson?
Yeah, I agree that we shouldn't be singling out just one type of business. I'm not really sure. I do agree that we need to address the concerns that were brought before us by the SGA, so we need to try to address that in some form or fashion. But I am concerned about a group of citizens being charged with investigating and maybe even making decisions about legal issues regarding discrimination. I do think the model that would be preferable anyway would be a citizen advisory committee or a civil rights committee that would have that could do some education, outreach, training, conflict management, that kind of stuff, offering the opportunity for conversations, engaging the community, and packaging, perhaps, as Commissioner Gertz said, packaging a claim. I don't see any problem with the attorney determining a reasonable basis. I mean, it actually saves the citizen from having to hire an attorney to do it. And I mean, our judges do that every day. They make decisions on their own. And I think that's sort of it's a pathway for someone to get, to determine whether or not there's a reasonable basis for that. And maybe there's a blending of the efforts. There's using our attorney's office to determine a reasonable basis, and then maybe establishing some sort of citizen advisory committee. And we've had plenty of those over the years in the county unified. There's still, I think the Solid Waste Citizen Advisory Committee is the only committee still around, but that provides some input to the, on issues. In that case, it's solid waste. But I do think the opportunity is for education and outreach, because that seems to be the crux of the issue at this point, is educating people on how to treat each other. Unfortunately, people don't parent their kids, I guess, to learn that on the way up. So maybe something to consider.
Ms. Bell.
For personal reasons, I've remained away from discussing this openly, but I served on the GOC committee. I strongly support what we accomplished with what we've presented, but I also at the same time would like to see us do something in the application of civil rights and move on that when it's appropriate. But thank you for all the energy that we've had tonight.
Mr. Sims.
A couple of questions after listening to everyone. First one would be, who would be appointing this committee? And if it's us, when we look at the diversity of us, we have a lot of work to do. Because it's us. And even tonight, when you looked at who got up to speak, there were a few of me that got up to speak. It was most of y'all. Not saying anything is wrong with that. But the fact is that, we have to look at this thing from a reality standpoint. When we appoint committees, periodically, over the years, usually it's going to be fewer of me on the committees than it is of the majority community. And it's really, it's most of the time when we appoint somebody we know. And like I said, I have a hard time a lot of times trying to find, I say I have to I'm sure that I'm going to appoint an African American when I appoint somebody to be on the committee. Because you guys may not, or you may, which is great. If you do, thank you. But for the most part, it's not going to happen. And if we do this great committee with the diversity that we have in this community, and we have a great diversity in this community because of the little place that sits across down the street there, that brings in this diverse community. And so as a result of that, looking at, who will we have on the Civil Rights Committee or Human Rights Committee and this kind of thing, That's something that we need to really take a real big look at when we would be making appointments to a committee that's going to talk about diversity. Because a lot of times when we appoint these committees, there is very little diversity. So we need to just think about it. I mean, everybody's in a hurry. We're going to get this civil rights thing, and this is how we're going to fix it. Because we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk it to death. You know, having lived through some of that, some of these young people, most of these young people, weren't even alive when some of the things that I dealt with. Like I say, you weren't even in your mother's womb. So, you know, so I understand about discrimination a little bit more than you do because I've had to live it. I've had to deal with that. You know, having to go to the Dairy Queen right up the street there and get my items and move off the property to eat them. Not even to sit in the car. To be able to do like everybody else that sat there. You can get it, we'll sell it to you, but you can't eat it here. Even our great varsity used to be like that. See, so discrimination is something that if you haven't really lived through it, you know, it sounds real good. We can just get this thing and we can paint it and it'll all go away, but it doesn't go away. You live with those things stay with you forever. And you make adjustments to it. See, until we change the hearts of people, discrimination ain't going away. And it's going to take a lot of work of us working on changing people's hearts. You know, how you feel about different things, that's what will make a difference in what kind of committee if we put together a civil rights committee, it's going to be real tough. Because somebody's going to have to bite the bullet. And say, do I really want to put that person on there? Because we may not think that they ought to be the one. They may be the best choice that we ever make. So let's be real careful about, I mean, it would be nice to have this committee. But again, who's going to make it? And how is it going to be made up? That's all I'll say about this.
Mr. Sims, I think we have more questions than we have answers. But thank you for your passionate response to it. I think we need to hear what you had to say tonight. Mr. Hamby.
Thank you, Mayor. And I too, Commissioner Sims, had some questions about how a committee would be formed and structured. And I just think to myself, certainly a citizens committee could start one now and really answer a lot of the questions that were raised here tonight. I think about committees over the past that have been real effective in helping advise us on things that weren't appointed by the government. Certainly, Grow Green came up with a lot of recommendations that of sustainability here in Athens that we've implemented. It was not a government committee. Bike Athens is another one that's still around and still does some good work. And Tyler's out there. We listen to you, Tyler. You don't think we do sometimes, but we do. And so they're a good advocacy group for their cause. And I guess what I'm suggesting is perhaps a citizens committee could be formed by citizens to also do the same thing and to really be effective at it, much more effective than perhaps a government-sponsored committee. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak on this? Okay, well, we're ready to go to our recommendations from the Planning Commission. And Mr. Griffin, would you please come forward? You ready, Mr. Griffin?
Just a minute.
Okay, our first item from Planning Commission is a request from James C. Warrens for TC Village Shops for change to from a commercial zoning to a, okay, I hate to read the whole thing because it's still on commercial general zoning I'm just going to go straight to the discussion on this and let Mr. Gertz open it up, and then you can help us with it.
Okay, I'll go ahead and do just a really quick presentation on it.
I'm sorry, I should-
796 Highway 29 North, it's a straight rezone from CR to CG. Future development designation, community center mixed use is appropriate for what they're asking for. One parcel at 2.5 acres. And with a straight rezoning, which we don't see a lot, but we do occasionally, no binding uses, improvements, or voluntary conditions are being self-imposed or requested for that at this time by the applicant. What this is, there's one 2.5 acre piece that you see on the screen to the left that kind of is a product of the Trail Creek Village rezoned, the PD a couple years ago, and then the recent CG rezoning that you all just recommended here on either side of the road. One little piece here in the middle that was originally, I think, part of the ownership of the Trail Creek PD, but didn't get rezoned at the same time. So they're simply asking for consideration to change the zoning to CG. Planning Commission recommended approval of it for the reasons you see listed there. I think one other issue to point out, because of its proximity to a right-in, right-out driveway immediately north of the property that goes into the Kroger Shopping Center, there will be no allowance for a curb cut along the frontage for this property. They will have to use all internal access from existing driveways if this is to be approved. And again, the recommendation is to approve with unanimous vote.
Mr. Kurtz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As Brad mentioned, this really is something of an anomaly, fairly small parcel wedged in between two pieces that are already commercial general, the Trail Creek Village, where the Kroger is the anchor tenant, and then the piece that we recently approved that really spans both sides of Highway 29. We've increasingly been encouraging interconnections. We're going to see some text about that in just a couple of minutes. I think that the way that this will tie into the Trail Creek Village and then the neighboring CG property that's yet to be developed will work well. So I don't see any problem with this at all.
Anybody else wish to discuss it? Okay, we'll move on to the next one, which is Mr. Warren's representing the Catholic Archdiocese of Atlanta on the rezoning, and this is the Prince Avenue property. We've seen it before, but we'll go again.
And I will keep this short for you. It is a request to rezone from CO and CO with conditions to a commercial downtown West End plan development. In May of this past year, it was presented to you as a change to the future development map and a request to rezone with the PD. At the request of the applicant and within your power to do so, you all approved the change to the future development map and returned the PD application to the Planning Commission. I think at that reason, all of us thought, or at that time, we all thought there may be significant changes to this that would come back and need to go back through the process. There have been no changes to this. What you have in front of you tonight is the same that you had in May that you returned. It did go back through the Planning Commission. Those were the waivers requested as they were before. The property site plan as you reviewed it in May, and a recommendation from the Planning Commission, which was the same as the recommendation to you in May, which was to approve.
Any discussion? Mr. Groves.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This in my district and, in fact, in my neighborhood, and we talked about this extensively before the representative pulled it. And my core thoughts about it are the same. Essentially, I think what we're doing is we're developing a good mixed-use center that's appropriately dense as a transition from the more 200-bedroom scale that we have in much of downtown to slightly lower scale. That then we'll move back to the RS8 neighborhood. A couple things I do want to mention, though, sort of really enhancing a couple of points that we talked about months ago. One is that I had worked with their land planner, Bob Smith, to develop an enhanced planting plan that would really dictate some higher caliper trees on both Childs and on Pulaski Street, and develop a typical plan for a more dense buffer between the plan and the RS8 zoning immediately adjacent. So essentially to provide greater protection for those folks and just have a stronger tree canopy. And so I'm going to be bringing that forward again. In addition, I've given some more thought to the streetscape all around. The needs of the neighborhood really transcend just this project, but certainly include this project. And I've engaged with Transportation Public Works to again initiate a neighborhood traffic management program. We did that a couple of years ago, but that was when the thresholds were different than GSE had recently brought forward to us and we've approved as a body. Many of you probably know that just up the street from here on Pulaski Street at the corner of Barrow Street is another forthcoming development. And if you couple that development, and certainly the significant activity that's happened at the Leathers Building further up Pulaski Street, the life of the neighborhood is very different now than it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And so I think we have to be responsive to that. And so given, again, that neighborhood traffic management aspect is much bigger than this, it won't be part of what I would bring forward in a commission-defined option. But I do want to make everybody aware of that and certainly want the neighborhood to be cognizant of that as well. Now, thinking about Prince Avenue itself, kind of the primary artery here, one of the things that would happen if this was approved is we would, both in terms of legality and in terms of practical effect, have expanded downtown to that first couple blocks of Pulaski Street. So many of you may know that the commercial downtown zoning extends up one side of Prince Avenue to include the Go Bar and the Grit and the Bottle Works and extends all the way to Big City Bread. And so this would extend that commercial downtown zoning to the other side of Pulaski Street as well. And one of the general principles in city planning is that your transportation infrastructure and your transportation planning should reflect your land use. And so in just the practical terms, that means that what we've got in terms of land use on both sides of Prince Avenue there is dense mixed-use development where you've got lots of pedestrian activity and you have seating directly adjacent to the public right-of-way. So, not really unlike what you've got on Clayton Street or Washington Street in a lot of our other commercial downtown zoned areas. And so, one of the things I'm interested in kind of hearing from this body is appetite for saying, well, let's go ahead and at least take a first step in having our transportation infrastructure correlate with our land planning here and having staff look at what some of the options can be for post-completion of this project to make that happen. Certainly made the point in the past that the vehicular travel lane arrangement on this segment of Prince Avenue is exactly the same as it is on Jefferson Highway out near the fuel farm by Jefferson River Road. But you've got very different use and very different range of activity, including, again, much pedestrian activity. And we've given a lot of energy to talk about places like the Grit Crossing. So I'd like us to take that first step and at least have staff bring to us some options that we can consider in our transportation planning along this block.
Ms. Link.
I share Kelly's concerns about traffic and pedestrian safety on this block. We are effectively extending downtown at least another half block down Prince Avenue, and there's nowhere downtown where we allow traffic to go 35 miles an hour, and we have a tremendous amount of activity. And once this project is complete, that activity will increase greatly with another 178 bedrooms. And theoretically, most of the folks who are living here will primarily be walking or hopping on a bus. There'll be, I think I counted 9 buses an hour that go down this block. So this is effectively a transit-oriented development, which is great. That's exactly the way we need to be thinking. I do have concerns about the traffic impact on the nearby neighborhood. Particularly Child Street. I've heard from residents of Child Street. I lived on Child Street for a brief time back in the late 90s. It's a very quaint neighborhood street, and it would really be detrimental to them if we'd see traffic visiting that project to end up filing through down Child Street. So I'd love to see this project include some directional signage that would specifically direct visitors to the project out to the main entrance, the Prince Avenue entrance, and also possibly, you know, a left turn only sign coming out of the residential lot. Whatever can be done to make sure that extra traffic is not filed down that neighborhood street. You know, and I see a great potential for conflict between, you know, Child Street and the entrance to the property and the Newton Street entrance to back behind the Bottle Works and the crosswalk right there. So I hope that we can get a traffic management plan as quickly as possible that will address all the uses in the immediate area and particularly encourage pedestrian activity and encourage safe cycling on that stretch. You know, I grip the steering wheel extra tight when I go down that block when I see a cyclist because it's a really tight, narrow little block and there's so much activity going on. And it would be really nice if we could encourage people to get out of their cars and get on their bikes and walk, and especially in this in-town area when it's totally feasible for folks to get around by alternate means of transportation. I'm really glad to see that planting plan. That is something I had concerns about as well. And I do have concerns about that big retaining wall in the front. And I would love to see the developer reach out to the Cultural Affairs Commission for some kind of screening, some kind of art or mural or paneling or planting or something. I'm not quite sure how tall that wall is. Brad, do you know? I mean, it looked like it was about 7 or 8 feet tall.
I think at its highest point, it may go almost that tall.
Yeah. I mean, that gives me pause. I mean, there's a whole lot that I really like about this project, and I think that it could serve as a model for future development along our commercial corridors, particularly those that are close to residential areas. But that wall just, I mean, I know there's topography problems there, but I think that, you know, if we can get creative in treating those blank surfaces, it won't be so imposing. So I would love to see us, you know, require that the developer offer some kind of treatment for that, softening that wall.
Anyone else wish to speak to the sign?
Madam Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Brad a couple of questions. I didn't see anything in our notes, but there were some people that were in opposition. Can you share what their opposition was, or were they pretty much the same?
It was largely the same as the first round. I mean, there should have been copies of at least the written concerns that were submitted in your packet to you, and I think largely those were the individuals who spoke as well. Adjacent property owners certainly that had some concerns. I mean, I think probably the two biggest concerns were impacts in here, you know, along the residences on Pulaski. You've got a situation right in here on Pulaski, you know, with the very flexible platting allowances that we have previously had, where you've got houses back in here very close to these property lines. We had that concern as it relates to the height of this building. Certainly concerns have been raised with Child Street in terms of traffic, as they were last time. But you know, I guess to answer your question, they were largely the same comments that you heard at your May meeting.
I still don't see it. I'm flipping through it, and maybe I'm looking in the wrong place. But thank you for.
If you did not get them for some reason, I can certainly provide you copies of those letters. But they should have gone out.
They're in the front end.
Packet.
They're in the back.
They're in the back.
Okay. Now I finally got to them. Yes. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Are the Juliet balconies that were discussed, is that how the extensive or enhanced buffer, is that sort of going to deal with that issue on that backside? Is that, I mean, they're still going to have those?
The buffer is just exclusively about the size and density of the planting material.
Okay. Well, will it address that concern, or, I mean, that seemed to be a concern we heard at the last.
I think you'd have to ask the individual.
Okay. I guess I'm also concerned about traffic, but, you know, I guess we'll see what comes forward as far as how they're going to manage that. I guess the thing that has me wondering a little bit about this development is I thought I'd understood that this development wasn't really going to be attracting students, but the application says it's going to have a swimming pool and indoor gym. That pretty much yells and screams student living. So, I mean, I guess I'm just wondering. I have to say, I mean, there's been a lot of activity on the east side. Obviously, we had another shooting, and it happened to be on the east side this time. And I know Andy and I live on that side of town, and as more students vacate our area, we tend, rents are going down, properties are being vacated. That becomes a concern. And so I guess I'm just kind of wondering. I thought we were sold that this was going to be more of an upscale kind of young adult kind of thing, not a student. But this is screaming students with these two amenities, I think.
We, as old folks, swim and work out too.
I don't think you have that many probably living in the roof with the what do they call it, the pool on top of the standard or whatever. I don't think you have many. I mean, you get a few. If you get a few students in there, it's going to be students. It's not going to end up being professionals in there, because professionals probably going to want to live next door to students. But I'm just it's a larger concern. That's all, and I hear it all the time. So.
This document that was included in our packet with the pretty color renderings, there's a handful of bullet points at the bottom of one of the pages. It says the following policies will be enforced. All apartments will be leased by the unit rather than by the bedroom. The apartments will not be rented furnished. All leaseholders must be over the age of 21 and full-time residents of the unit. All leaseholders must qualify on the basis of their own income and credit. No parental or other third-party guarantees will be accepted. The apartments will not be marketed to students. So this was submitted by the developer as part of the official application, correct? Mm-hmm. So the developer is held to these standards. To
the extent that we can legally regulate, I don't know when it gets into income and things like that becomes a zoning restriction that we're going to touch in terms of regulation. But I certainly think that in conjunction with the design of these units too. Not to say that a student, from our standpoint of who we would allow to live in there, there are students that are over 21 years old that behave just fine. And but these aren't 4-bedroom, 4-bath units with big parking lots. They tend to have, I think they're 2- and 3-bedroom splits that look a lot more like houses in traditional multifamily than what we've generally seen with students.
So these are 1- and 2-bedroom, primarily 1-bedroom units, right? There's only, I can attest that there's a need for this kind of housing for moderate income, working folks, small families, retirees, empty nest single parents. There's a desperate need for this kind of housing in town, and I don't foresee this going student housing. The 1- and 2-bedroom format alone, I think is, sure, if there's a handful of students that get in there, but I don't see it becoming a student ghetto like, these rising towers that we have all over town are.
Is there anybody who hadn't spoken that wants to speak before I call on Kelly? Go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One detail, Brad, that somebody brought up, and I'm glad he did. Along the frontage of this, will the power poles, the utility poles be buried?
I don't think so, but let me check on that, and I'll get you an answer.
All right.
It seems like we've had that discussion. It almost seems like at one point they said they were, and then maybe they're not now. But before I give you a definitive, I'll find out and let you know.
I appreciate that.
I have a question back on the balconies. When they were talking about it, the balconies are towards the parking, not towards the other resident, the existing residents. Is that part of the
these
character
units,
change that they made?
On these units, it's more that way. These units, they really changed the footprint of these buildings from what used to be much more of a solid across the back to these offsets with internal. The other issue with the Juliet balconies, they're really for purposes of opening the doors and letting in fresh air. You can't put a grill on it. You can't hang out. If they're anything, they're a foot or two deep.
Well, I guess what I, in my mind, am remembering was the woman who talked about they're just going to be looking down into my yard and looking down into my windows and that kind of thing. And I guess I was just trying to empathize with that concern for Childs and hoping that they had improved that, but it sounds like it's the same as it
I
was.
mean, I think they've improved it in terms of the numbers that will be there. And really, I mean, a Juliet balcony is a larger opening, but in terms of, it functions very much just like a door with an optional opening in terms of being able to see out of it versus a window. That, if it was a larger window, you could do the same thing. But they did make changes to that building. I think they dropped the height of it from their original design, so it wasn't as looming over the top.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on to item number 12, which are the text amendments.
Okay. Would this actually stem from a request from you all some time ago for us to consider, and I believe the actual language of the initial request was to consider how to include some level of front yard parking on the Atlanta Highway and Lexington Roads, kind of where it started. We took that a step further, really to just specifically focus on those two corridors. Was going to put us into specific special district overlays just on those two corridors, which was far more complicated. When we got to looking at the things that were similar about those two corridors and were kind of unique to the rest of the community, those were largely our commercial general zone corridors that are not on level 1 or 2 restricted streets, which brings more design standards to it. There are a few other pieces. The 29 corridor at the Kroger Shopping Center that we just looked at a minute ago has CG without that level 1 or 2 restriction. There's some on Commerce, but not a lot. So that was an easier text amendment from a standpoint of amending and just saying that all properties within Athens-Clarke County that are zoned CG that are not on a level 1 or 2 street, the following shall apply in terms of a design standard change. And that's kind of where we ended up landing on it in terms of a recommendation to you. Planning Commission did hold 2 work sessions. They brought in initially 2 commercial realtors from Athens that shared their input and experiences about a text amendment of this type. After that meeting, they wanted to hear more and from both sides, so we held a second work session with 2 professional land planners, a representative of Complete Streets Athens and a representative from Bike Athens that all agreed to come talk to the Planning Commission and they gave them some good points, and I think it was beneficial to the whole group. In the end, what you have as a text amendment from the Planning Commission would be to allow as a modification any of those properties that I previously mentioned on these CG corridors could have a single double-loaded row of parking between their front door and the street, which is about a 60-foot wide maximum pavement width. They have parking on both sides of a 2-way aisle. Still has to have the landscaping between that parking and the street. Still has to have the sidewalk and the direct pedestrian connection from the street to the front door. And it has to have provided direct cross-access easement opportunities to properties on either side. We didn't take it as far, and there's been a lot of interest in trying to pursue more of this cross-access requirement for ease of vehicular travel. But at this point, what this says is that if you want the parking in front of your building, you shall provide the easements on either side. If you're not comfortable with providing those easements, you don't have to, but then you don't park in the front either. And so it's more of an option than a requirement. That was supported by the Planning Commission. I would encourage you, if you've not had a chance also, to read the pink sheet and the discussion. I think really one of the overreaching recommendations that the Planning Commission wanted you to hear was they saw this as a good first step in looking at these corridors and encouraging some commercial development, especially as it relates to out parcels in front of larger shopping developments. But they really felt strongly that both of these corridors deserve more of a comprehensive corridor study that didn't just deal with specifically land use, but it was land use and it was real estate and it was economic development and in the whole spectrum, recognizing that requires money and time and the assistance more than likely of consultants, but they did want you to know that as well. So with all that, the recommendation is from them would be to approve this proposed text amendment as presented.
I watched this as it moved through the planning department and in the Planning Commission, and this is some really good work. I think this is a win-win, and just so people understand what he was talking about, in case you didn't, is that, first of all, it's front yard parking only in the CG commercial zones on the type 1, type 2 corridors, which means basically it's suburban commercial corridors. And then this double parking, double loaded parking with an access lanes in front going to the property line is what's being required. It's kind of like building sidewalks, because now if the next guy does it next door, then you've got the beginnings of a street that goes in front of those stores. And that'll take forever, but it's a good first step. I think from the conversations I've had from the commercial real estate community that this is one of the obstacles to some of our redevelopment along these corridors. So this is a good first step. It's not the last, but it's a good first step. So I intend to fully support this.
Anybody else want to discuss it? Jared.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So as Commissioner Neesmith mentioned, or maybe he didn't mention, but I thought he was going to, this clearly relates to some of the ongoing discussions we've been having about the Atlanta Highway corridor and also the Lexington Road corridor, and in particular the questions of redevelopment. So in most places it's much cheaper to build a greenfield site than it is to redevelop a brownfield site. And so I think this will probably make it a little bit easier for the redevelopment of some of those type sites on these corridors. I did have one question, though, since my knowledge of code is not anywhere. Brad's forgotten more about code than I think I ever knew. But it says here, the developer shall comply with the screening standards of Section 9-30-9-E-6. I know I got it at the tip of my fingers, but what does that mean?
It's the required evergreen hedge that's planted at a 3-foot height to screen the fronts of the vehicles, and then the required street tree plantings in addition to that on 30-foot centers.
Okay, that's what I thought it meant. Thank you.
Anybody else? Ms. Wright, and then come back to you, Ms. Dickerson.
Can you help me understand if this is inclusive of the Oconee Street, those commercial areas? I feel like some of these little, been there a long time, little stores and the parking's in front right now. Would this allow them to be sort of refurbished and renovated and be able to keep parking like it is now? Is this going to help with that?
There is, and I think I'm right on this, there is
Oconee's a level 2.
A portion of Oconee that is not, I think from maybe the river up to about where Oconee Street comes back into Oak is not classified. But then from that point, just before you get to what used to be the drugstore, is now a restaurant, to the bypass is a level 2 section. I believe that's right.
That's it.
And then once you get beyond the bypass on out Lexington Road, it is not classified. There may be one section out around Walmart that might still be. Just that one node at Whit Davis Road may still have a level 2 classification. And a lot of those classifications in those more suburban areas is a product of the original 2000 comprehensive plan, where we had the map that started to identify the neighborhood centers and the community centers at those nodes. And a lot of those nodes then picked up to level 1 or 2 corridor status in order to try to encourage more of at least a walkable location at an intersection.
Yeah.
That's what drove the original 2972 level 2 as well. That's since been removed. But for the most part, it's Broad Street, Atlanta Highway, once you pass Colwell Banker going west out to the county line, and it's Lexington Road past the bypass with a little piece of Oak Street from where Oconee leaves it until Oconee comes back.
Where we're kind of the Waffle House area.
That still is classified as a level 2, yes.
Okay. Thanks.
I guess I'd just like an update from the manager about the corridor studies. I know we've had the ULI, but I think you were working on like maybe the next step to get to that corridor study. Give us an update.
Yes, staff is developing a scope for that. It's the hope that, they're both unique corridors, but there are common things that we need to look at them uniquely, and it could be that we do that all at one time with one consultant. I would imagine we would go out to RFP. This is a pretty big undertaking. Yes. I know y'all are anxious to get underway, and so the ball is in our court, and we will give both committees a draft scope to look at. It'd be important for, I think, the commissioners on that to help coordinate that discussion, because I'm sure y'all will want to try to change the corridors, scopes, and perhaps they just need to be flat different from each other.
Okay, Mr. Hamby.
Well, Sharon sort of asked my question, but I'll ask a follow-up question. And what would be the time frame for that? And is it something that could be completed by the time we engage a T-SPLOST referendum?
Well, y'all will be hearing about T-SPLOST referendum coming up in September at the work session. But a teaser is that the call for projects is probably going to end by the 1st of 2017. And so for us to get us a consultant on board and undertake that effort before then, we won't be able to do it in that time frame.
Well, that doesn't help much. If we're looking at, or maybe it could if we can.
But if we can get somebody engaged and we can, and they have started working, they can give us some advanced ideas about some things that we might, from an infrastructure standpoint.
Right, and the appropriate language that could go on a T-SPLOST language that could encompass some of the recommendations that would come out of that report. Simply because I think all of us realize that could be certainly an opportunity for funding whatever recommendations come out of such a study.
Ms. Bell.
Thanks, Blake.
I guess I need to say this with a sense of humor, but I will never understand why the front of store parking was ever taken away. The common sense of it just never did. And being a business owner, I'm just tickled to death to see this developing. And you don't have to answer that, okay?
I wasn't going to.
Ms. Wright.
Yeah, in discussion with the corridor studies, I want to encourage us to work on a protocol. We have an Oconee Street corridor study and a Prince Avenue corridor study that we have not gotten to. How do we implement them? How do we prioritize it? How do we tackle those? So while we're adding the corridor studies in, I'd like to see the process develop for us to tackle those and start with the two that we already have, and that process could be well underway by the time this one comes forward.
Anybody else? Okay, guys, we're going to go back to our executive session now.
Mr. Neesmith.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
I
Neesmith.
have one request, if you don't mind. I'd like to request that an item be added to the agenda, and it's a very simple one, and that's the Greenway Commission has submitted a list of names of their nominees for their commission. Those folks are anxious to get to work, so if we could possibly consider adding that to the agenda, very much appreciate it. Thank you.
We're going to take a 5-minute break so that
okay.
we can
go for it.